Hello and welcome everybody to another session of Insight Festival, a format where we talk about artificial intelligence and the ever-increasing interconnected world with regard to our festival topics, autonomy and democracy. It is with great pleasure that I introduce our guest today, Lorena Jaume Palasi. She is the founder of the Ethical Tech Society. Her research focuses on the ethics of digitalization and automation, and in this context on questions of legal philosophy. She was part of a high-profile expert group for the European Commission and has been appointed by the Spanish government as an expert on artificial intelligence. She continuously publishes on this topic, for example, on data protection, rights on privacy and publicity, public goods and discrimination. With AlgorithmWatch, another non-profit organization, she won the Theodor Heuss Prize, and I quote, for the contribution to a differentiated consideration of algorithms and their mechanisms of action. And with us is also Gerfried Stocker, Artistic Director of Ars Electronica. And I would jump right into the discussion and would ask you, Lorena, to tell us a little bit about your work with AlgorithmWatch. What are the goals and intentions?
Thank you for the kind introduction and invitation. The goals is really to understand the social dimension of technology. When we talk about technology, there's this belief or there's this statement that was made by Joseph Weizenbaum, one of the fathers of artificial intelligence, saying, well, we're talking about socio-technical systems. But in the very reality of it, what we see on everyday lives is that we have a lot of insights within this technological dimension and less insight on the social dimension. So, and this is the fact, and this is due to the fact that we have created a lot of disciplines in academia, and those disciplines build walls and build their own mechanisms, their own methodologies, their own language, and socio-technical systems require a lot of interdisciplinary work, require a lot of interaction with people from different sectors and different disciplines and knowledge. And this is something that hasn't been done that much. And considering that more and more of these technologies are permeating and being used in the everyday life, my focus and the focus of this initiative is to understand what is the social impact of technology in reality when people have this organic interaction and embeddedness of machines and programs helping moderate or assisting their lives for everything from private stuff to really things that you apply on your everyday life as a professional and your work. So it's very much about unpacking that social impact.
Mm-hmm. And you even released a manifesto on algorithmic decision making. Can you tell us something about the points that are mentioned there?
Yes. The point with algorithmic decision-making ideas, I mean, I think the term is a bit sort of confusing because, of course, when we talk about machines and programs, those technologies do not make decisions. To make a decision, you need something. You need a lot of requirements that machines cannot accomplish. Things like intentionality, or things like a theory of mind, so the possibility of being able to put yourself logically in someone else's shoes. And this is something that machines can do. But of course, what we see is that with automation, you execute decisions that are made in advance. And understanding these mechanisms, that when you automatize something, when you use this type of technologies, what you do is take decisions in advance to a certain extent without understanding really the context, because the context sometimes is very different. That this carries a lot of high risk, that this also has a lot of social implications, and that this is something that cannot be made in a neutral way. because technologies are an expression of our cultural and social beliefs. So the manifest was very much about making this dimension more placative and making clear that there is no such thing as neutrality or objectivity. And when you create these programs or technologies, there's a lot of implications that you don't even realize that you're making when you create them, but that very much shape the way how these programs assume things about the world and the people that are going to be impacted by that. Also need to understand that mathematics is also very much political, and it's a form of power that is different to the power that is enshrined in law, but it has the same implications and the same consequences, sometimes even deeper, depending on where you apply this type of mathematics.
And it seems to me you have a lot to do with legal authorities with your other initiative, with Ethical Tech Society. Would you care to flesh out the differences a little bit between AlgorithmWatch and Ethical Tech Society?
Sure. AlgorithmWatch was created more first as a sort of initiative trying to get this social dimension and social impact, and now it's turning more and more into a sort of European version of what ProPublica was. So it's more, it has more an editorial, journalistic approach. It's more about understanding and describing the stories of technologies that are being used and implemented everywhere. Ethical tech is more about not only creating facts and elaborating studies about the social usage and the social impact of technology, because we assume that in much of the conversations that we have about technology, we assume that once the developers have developed the technology is precisely going to be used as it was conceived. But the reality of it is quite different. We see that, I mean, postmodern times, we understand that once you create something, it's out of your control, and the people that use what you create also convey and deploy meaning to what you created. Because in the very end, artificial intelligence-based programs are also a cultural artifact. So they're going to convey and carry the meaning that you put on them in your everyday usage. So understanding that organicism in the relationship between machine and humans is part of the things that we want to understand in ethical tech. So it's very much about creating experiments and understanding this interaction, because we don't have enough data and knowledge about that in the first place. But it is also not only creating facts, but also creating theories. I think that many of the facts that we have out there need to be enshrined and made consistent in a whole theory about how we approach and what is it to technology that has a political impact, and how should we politically think about this type of technology. And I think that this is very much needed. When I look at how we in Western thinking have a path or mark the way how we legally think about society, it is very much unable to understand the collectivistic character of technology. So on the one side, as a democracy, we put the individual in the center, which was a result of the historical experiences with autocracies and feudalism and the abuse of human beings for the sake of society, so to say. So society would be put first before individuals. So that was a logical response to try to contrast that approach and that abuse of human beings. But on the other side, of course, one of the things that societies in democratic European thinking have have not been doing as part of the homework of a democracy is also try to balance this dialectic between the individual and the societal, because of course society is also more than the sum of its individuals. And this means that methodologically democracies are very much, they use what we call a methodological individualism for everything, for the creation of law, for the ethics that merely so to say, impact the mainstream media and our main societal expectations. And this also has a consequence in the way how we create algorithmic systems. And this means on the one side that we have systems, algorithmic systems, that are quite from the methodology an approach that does not understand individuals. It has more collectivistic approach. It's about using statistical averages, so it's about getting an insight about a collective or a society, but it's less about understanding the individual, because it's more of getting an overview of things. And that's the point of statistics, by the way. That's nothing new. At least with the AI that we're using again right now, which is statistic-based AI. I mean, there's other realms within AI that are not statistic-based, but in the very end, those are mechanisms to understand collectives. On the other side, we in democracies, because we're unable to understand collectives, because that is part of the work that we haven't been doing that much, at least on the legal field, right now we have a problem or a friction, because on one side you have collectivistic tools that you're trying to get a hold on and govern with a very individualistic approach. So metaphorically, this is as if you would try to get a hold of the forest by trying to regulate each single tree, which doesn't work, of course. And what is happening right now is that we need more theories about what is the democratic version of societal rules that transcend individual rules. So that is also part of the work.
Yeah. So it's obviously a very important part of your work to raise awareness for artificial intelligence, which is also what we are doing at Ars Electronica, for example, with the museum. So I think it's a big topic, and it has to be tackled on many levels. Would you, Gerfried, care about to pitch in on the...
Well, I think that we need to work from these both directions. I mean, it's obviously extremely important to create the awareness and understanding in the governing bodies, from the European Union to the national governments, that we need a new understanding of how to govern and rule in this digital world. Just because the digital technology itself follows different laws doesn't mean that it's a completely lawless sector, and that we have no chance to apply the rules and the laws of our everyday life that we have been developing in a very strong social fight with many revolutions to establish the human rights, the civil rights that we have. This doesn't mean that we just have to let them go because digital technology works different. And I think this is one of the very big problems, that still all this digital revolution and AI on top of it is too much considered to be an issue of technologists and scientists. Slowly this is changing, preferably also to wonderful work that you and your colleagues are doing. And what we are trying here, coming from the arts and culture, is to approach this from the educational side, and really trying, so to say, to lay a foundation on the other side of society. So while you are working, so to say, on the top-notch decision makers, we are trying to educate literally from kindergarten to help people to understand that we have a systemic situation of our world that is extremely based on this digital technology, and that what you need to succeed, whatever you consider your success, but what you need to succeed is basic skills, a basic understanding. And it's not about to deliver more engineers and programmers and software engineers to the industry, but it's really about, I think, what is a civil right is to be able and to get the support to understand how our modern digital world works, what it is based on, and of course in the next step how power structures and control in this world is regulated and working. And final goal of course is to understand how to utilize it on your own, and how to convert people from just good consumers who are buying whatever the industry is delivering and promoting to become creators. And I think it's really a wonderful thing that in this area education creativity leads also to something that we usually call entrepreneurship. And I think if in this field of entrepreneurs, if we get more people who understand the power of this technology as a way to self-express and to be successful in society, then we might also be able to establish a European dimension, something that is often called now a new digital humanism, which has nothing to do actually with the philosophical direction, but really is a kind of term that somehow established or was established to summarize all these needs, to finally understand that the digital revolution is primarily, at least nowadays, a cultural and social revolution.
Yes. I wanted to stress this point especially about the European Union, and you, Lorena, have been working with the European Union as well, because sometimes you get the feeling that policymakers are, especially with national laws, are like a little bit behind, of course, which is intrinsic to the topic. Yeah, a little bit. Would you care to elaborate on the importance of the European Union to this topic, like in a broader perspective?
I think we are at the very beginning of an ethical conversation, and that will hopefully also lead to different conversation on the legal terms. But also, I think you need both, right? I mean, ethics is something that the European Union has been working on for the last 2 years, trying to elaborate sort of a common sense of a common understanding of the ethics within Europe, under which we want to deploy artificial intelligence, which is a different thing to laws. Ethics and law have very different functions. They are both normative, but they serve different purposes, and the one cannot substitute the other. So when we talk about this ethical conversation at the European level, that it's still very much at the beginning, because of course politicians are lagging behind, but because also many disciplines have been not working and talking to each other, and we are in a field when we talk about AI. We're in a field that requires a high level of interdisciplinarity. Take, for instance, the contact tracing apps. You don't only need engineers, you also need epidemiologists that tell you what is it that you really want to know and want to trace. Then, of course, you need sociologists that tell you what are the difference in the country where you want to deploy this, so that you understand how many different languages you might need to translate this app to, that you understand what are the asymmetries in society and that might lead to different types of acceptance on the one side, or access to the app. And we see that there are countries that were not thinking about the blind or deaf population in the country, and they are creating processes where you have to call a number, or where you are unable as a blind to navigate and install the app. So those are things where you need a sociologist, where you need someone specialized in or experts on people with some sort of handicaps. You need experts on also on how you communicate this, and there's so many different things that only for that special app you need from different disciplines, where you cannot have a single person that understands and can cope with all the requirements. And you need, of course, a data protection specialist, lawyer, and so on. So with that shows that if we really want to bring this farther and understand how to deploy this, we need a lot of disciplines that we're not that have been working without talking to other disciplines to get together. And this means that we're going to need to develop new methodologies and new languages, because every discipline has its own language. And this is why we are at the beginning of the conversation to a certain extent, because of course, yes, in philosophy, we have people that since the 70s and the 80s and the 90s have been talking about this. We also have this in sociology and psychology and so on. But the integration of all those disciplines, it hasn't happened yet. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of misunderstandings. There's a lot of things that we lack the vocabulary to talk about, and you could see that in the high-level expert group of the European Union. We had a lot of private sector, we had very few civil society, very few people coming from humanities, and that makes the thing difficult to create a common language. So it's important just to have this type of conversations at that very high level within the region, to just create a common understanding, at least within European continent, of the social dimension of it.
Sorry to interrupt you here, but do you see a positive development in this? Because I like very much how you described the essential need for interdisciplinarity to cope with these challenges that AI is bringing. And I think this is uncomparable to any other technology that we had, or technological revolution. It is more than ever intrinsically a social, a cultural, a societal challenge. And at least a little bit, I think that in the last 2 years or so, there is more understanding that this has to be tackled by interdisciplinary approach. Of course, it's not enough yet. It's still very one-sided. But do you see also some light on the end of the tunnel, or am I too optimistic here?
As long as we're having a conversation, there's always light. But I think that we're at a crossroads, so to say, at least from the legal perspective, because look, we've been regulating the legal continental culture of this continent was always value-oriented regulation. So you would define what value do you want to protect for a specific sector, and according to that value, you would create regulation. And every sector would have a very specific technique of regulation that is different. So if you think about European law, you could think about it as if it is a house. This means that you just cannot break a wall without knowing whether it's a bearing wall, because the architecture has a lot of consequences for other realms or other sectors of law. So you can have, so to say, law collisions and so on. Now, what we see with as a new trend, it's a 20-year-old new trend. It's new because it's in comparison to the centuries of law creation, it's new, but of course it's not that new anymore from a recent historical approach. But since the introduction of regulation towards technology, what we have started to do is something that goes quite the opposite as we have regulated until now, which is the technology-oriented regulation. That is, you don't define the value, but you just define conditions for the way of how you process data, or conditions of how you process or you create any type of specific hardware. And this means that the way how you regulate there goes across all sectors. It creates a new technique, and this technique might go and conflict these value-oriented ways that we had. So we have to decide right now which way do we want to take. Do we want to regulate everything horizontally, technology-oriented, or do we want to go back to the value-oriented way of regulation? Mm-hmm. And this is very much creating a lot of law collisions. And if we think also about the fact that because democracies are evolving, we create more laws. So understanding whether these laws are consistent and whether there's going to be a law collision becomes increasingly difficult, because you have thousands of laws, so you cannot look at it from a manually. You have to do it somehow. And this is, by the way, one of the projects that we're doing at the Ethical Tech. We're doing this with the DFKI and with Max Planck to understand through AI, how much AI regulation do we have already in place before creating new regulation? And we think that it's important to understand what's already in place. But this is sort of a critical point. And I think it's important that we have this type of conversations to really go back to, it's a very abstract level, but it's the mechanics of democracy that are at stake here. And I think this is a fundamental conversation. We're just starting to have it. Because, of course, European Union thinks if we create this technical regulation, sounds good, it's easy. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to revisit that.
Yes.
That's definitely, I think, very important. I have to jump in a little bit with unexpected question to you, because you might have recognized we have the festival here taking place this year on the premises of the local university. And in this whole question about how to prepare society to cope with this transformation, there has been a lot of discussion also now, how should universities change? And maybe you could, from your point of view, also with your inside view into the academic world, give a little idea, how would you see that the university of the 21st century that is able to cope with these questions where technology and society is so entangled, how would the university of the 21st century have to look like?
I think that, you know, when we, at the very beginnings of science in the European continent, historically, we had philosophy. It was the mother of all philosophy, so of all disciplines, so to say. And from the 18th, 19th century, when things got more complicated, we started to create all those walls, disciplinary walls with methodologies, and it was important. But I think that the future with and through technology requires that we break a lot of these walls and start creating common intersections between different disciplines and work together. And work together doesn't mean, oh, we have just one seminar about biology and one seminar about architecture, but this means that we need to merge these two together. This means that we need to have a seminar, for instance, just to put an example, as the things that Neri Oxman is doing, where she is sitting as an architecture together with a biologist, and they study the bacteria and your intestines, and then creates out of that knowledge suits for astronauts that are based on the knowledge that you gather about how bacteria work, so that these suits are able to understand whether your skin is injured and how to heal that skin. So sort of, so to say, smart astronaut suits. And that type of things only happen if you put together disciplines that on the very first sight might not go together hand in hand, but this is where innovation happens, at the intersection of disciplines, at the intersection of things that you don't expect, at the questioning of methods, at the questioning of preconditions and assumptions. And if you really want to create innovation, it's not that much about creating technology, but about questioning what is at place, about identifying things that don't work and trying to figure out what could be the contrary and perhaps might work. And that requires a lot of change in vocabulary, in methodology. That requires a lot of patience also as well, because there's a lot of pain. I'm telling you, I'm working with lawyers and I'm working with engineers, and it's hard at the very beginning when someone says synonym for a lawyer that doesn't exist. But for a linguist, it does. So we are creating a method with this search engine that we're creating right now to understand how much AI is out there. That's a technique that was created, or the idea is based on the technique created by a linguist and literature scientist, Fabio Moretti. and it's called distant reading. So it's a way of understanding text in a different way, it's a sort of machine understanding. And this methodology, we're applying it through different types of algorithmic systems into the law field. And
Great.
complicated.
Thank you very much for this. Thank you.
So yes, thank you very much to both of you for this interesting discussion. I also want to recommend our viewers the keynote of Lorena, which is today from 7:30 to 8:15 on the New World channel. So please tune in. Thank you very much for this interesting talk.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Lorena. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for having me.
Yes.